All right, folks, for the next part of our segment, join me down this quiet road in Frankfort, New York. Hello, welcome to Crime Bytes, the show where we talk about some truly bizarre and disturbing crime cases. My name is Liz, and today is True Crime Tuesday. So, welcome to New York. It's been waiting for you. I can't say welcome to New York without saying that. Can anyone else? I can't sing either, so. And we'll have to go on location sometime in New York City if I ever have the courage or audacity to do so. We're about 4 hours from there now in Frankfort, New York today. And this is the New York I'm more familiar with. Not much going on here. This is the capital, Albany. I've lived there for 5 years. Frankfort is like about an hour and a half from Albany, and this is the next place in our tour of Lewis Lent's horrific story. Before we get into that, though, we're going to promote Just Strong. I've got their hoodie on. It's still kind of hoodie season here. The snow is almost melted, and by the time this airs, hopefully, it'll be green. But for this one, we're going to need to just be strong. So if you like this look and message, head to juststrong.com, use this coupon code to get 10% off your first purchase, and let's stay just strong together. Okay, now that I've got myself a little bit pepped up, let's get into it. And we're going to start by meeting Sara Anne Wood. Sara was the youngest of 3 children, and at the time of our story, she was 12 years old. She was described as intelligent and lively with a love of dance and poetry. She loved Dolly Parton and was described as a giver. It was August 18th of 1993, and Sara was leaving vacation Bible school at Norwich Corners Presbyterian Church, which is just right down the road. And at the time, her dad was the pastor there, and they only lived about a mile away, so they would let her ride home from the church by herself on her bike. I mean, look around. What would happen? But at the time, Frankfort had about 7,500 residents. So it was one of those towns where everyone just knew each other. And because her father was the pastor, many people in the community just loved Sara and her family. She was last seen pushing her bike towards her house wearing a pink Guess Who shirt, turquoise shorts, and sandals. That evening, her bike was found off by the side of the road, laid up against a tree. The items she had with her were kicked in the bushes besides it. So in this instance, everyone was worried, and the police went right out and started looking for her. Hundreds of local volunteers would join in as well, and they looked first where they found her bike, obviously, and then they just started spreading out and expanding that radius for miles, but they didn't find her, and the community would rally together. But despite everyone's efforts, the case would go cold for about 5 months. During that time, Sara's case would appear on 48 Hours and America's Most Wanted. In each episode, because it was still unsolved, they were just pleading that if anyone knew anything to just come forward. But nothing would come from that until 5 months later, when the Herkimer County District Attorney would get a call from the Pittsfield Police. Apparently, a man that they had in custody for the attempted abduction of another young girl had just confessed to murdering Sara. Let's head back to my studio and talk about it. Welcome back, guys. So after he was brought in, and we will get a little bit more into that next week, Lewis Lent made 3 shocking confessions. First, he would confess about his master plan, which literally is the stuff that horror movies are made from, and then he would confess to killing Jimmy Bernardo. And shortly after that, he would confess to killing Sara Anne Wood. It seems like he was still just kind of on an unburdening streak at this point. He didn't confess like in Jamie Lusher's case as a part of a deal. So after he formally confessed to what he did to Jimmy, he would sit down with the police and tell them his side of the story. And they would know that he was telling the truth because he knew details about the case that the public didn't know, just like he did in the case of Jamie and Jimmy. And he would tell the police that on August 18th of 1993, he was driving around in his van, and we're about to get into full creep mode too, guys, because he would literally confess that sometimes he would take driving trips in his van for the sole purpose of attempting to locate vulnerable girls. Vulnerable girls that fell into the age range of 14 to 17 years old. And he would make maps. He would take maps with him and draw on them. Maps of these small towns where he drew notes about possible future victims. So he recalls driving west on Route 20 in New York on this day, and his plan was that if he found a vulnerable girl, and in his words, if he found a girl who looked older than 10 years old, my intention would be to kidnap her and use her for sex. Yeah, exactly. Then he would recall seeing some signs indicating that he was approaching Utica, and he saw a little girl who was pushing her bike up a hill, attempting to balance both her bike and some packages that she had with her at the time. Slow down there, pal. So when he saw her, two things stood out to him right away: that she was vulnerable and that she was sexually arousing to him. So he grabbed his hunting knife from the floor of his van. He had it laying there already unsheathed and just waiting for him to grab, just one step less, so that he was literally ready to pounce. And he would pull his van slightly up ahead of her so that she would have to kind of walk past him. She was approaching from the driver's side of his van, and when she got kind of close enough to where he felt ready, he jumped out with the knife in his hand. And obviously she panicked. He said that she dropped her bike and her packages and tried to run away, but only made it a few steps before he would catch up with her, trip her, grab her, then threatened her with his knife and force her into the van. He quickly taped her hands together and would threaten her again, tell her to lay face down on the open area of the floor of the van. And at this point, he started getting worried about being spotted, so he grabbed her bike and the packages that she had and just threw them off to the side of the road the best that he could so that they were out of direct line of sight, and took off. He would tell her to shut up when he was tired of hearing her plea for her life. And he would drive around until he found a location that he felt was deserted enough. And, hey buddy, thank you. Oh my goodness, he is on bacon mode. So Lewis described it as a logging road, and when he got there, he taped her mouth shut so that she couldn't talk to him anymore, at which point he would assault her before making her walk out to the woods with him. And after they walked for about 100 feet or so, he would just tell her to stop walking. And at this point, he would take a large tree limb and just strike her in the back of the head with it. He would claim that after he did this, she would fall to the ground immediately and didn't move after that. He would go back to his van and grab a shovel. And he kept a shovel in his van specifically to dig graves. And after that, he dug a shallow grave, rolled her lifeless body into it, and stated that he didn't check to see if she was breathing because he didn't like to touch dead bodies. Which is interesting because with Jimmy Bernardo, he did. He checked and then he pinched his nose shut. But then he just left his body out in the open and it was found. With Sara, he seemed almost creeped out and maybe even repulsed by her lifeless body, but he was definitely more concerned with concealing it after the fact than her actually being dead, which I don't know. This can be said of Jamie Lusher as well, as we have still yet to find his remains. Slow down. Anyhow, he would throw some dirt, leaves, twigs, and branches on top of this shallow grave and then lay the tree limb that he used to kill her next to it. He would then put her clothes in a bag that he would drop in a dumpster at a shopping plaza on his way home to North Adams, which was where he was living at this point. After this, he would draw a map that showed where he had buried Sara. He would claim that the location was in a remote area of the Adirondacks near Raquette Lake. So obviously the New York authorities wanted to take him there and have him assist in the search for Sara's remains. And this is when things would start to get a little bit dicey between New York and Massachusetts, because like we mentioned before he confessed to killing Sara Anne Wood, he confessed to killing Jimmy Bernardo, and that also turned into, I don't want to say a battle of the states, but each state wanted him for different things. And within Jimmy's case, he was abducted in Massachusetts and murdered in New York, so it was a little bit muddier than Sara's case in that aspect, because she was abducted and murdered in New York, as far as we know. Anyhow, New York wanted to take him out to search for Sara's body right away, but because he was captured and in custody in Massachusetts for another crime, that wasn't just an easy okay, unfortunately. The district attorney in Massachusetts at that time was concerned that if they let Lent go to New York, they might not get him back. And that was a serious concern, because they also felt that they could give Lent a harsher sentence in Massachusetts than he might end up receiving in New York. We will get a little more into the technicalities in another episode, but basically he was looking at life without the chance of parole in Massachusetts, and he was looking at a 25 to life sentence with the possibility of parole in New York. So nobody, except maybe Lent himself, would want that option. Sara's distraught father would actually end up carrying a cross on his shoulders and walking from his home in New York to Pittsfield, which is about a 2-hour drive over some pretty rough hills. But he was protesting the DA's resistance to allowing Lent come to New York to reveal where he had buried his daughter. And the DA did obviously feel awful that this was happening. However, for the reasons that we already mentioned, he chose to keep Lent right where he was, because he felt that he was going to be able to make sure that Lent never saw a day outside of prison again. And he really also felt that Lent would never give up the actual location of Sara's remains. So even though Massachusetts was doing what it thought was in the best interest of everyone involved, New York obviously wanted Lent as well, and they did attempt to have him extradited, but ultimately Massachusetts would refuse. The search for Sara's remains would begin, and it would become pretty extensive. They would begin at Blue Mountain Lake, which is a small lake near Raquette Lake. There would be over 100 state troopers, the Environmental Conservation Police, some members of the Air Force, and a whole bunch of civilian volunteers just scouring the area. They used canine assistance, and Sarah's family also assisted in the search and with feeding the volunteers. But ultimately, they didn't end up finding Sara. They searched for over 50 days in just really nasty weather conditions, and Lewis Lent, after all of that, would claim that he didn't bury her body anywhere near Raquette Lake and would just outright refuse to disclose the actual location, stating that there was another victim's body close to hers and he didn't want it found. While he was being sentenced for the murder of Jimmy Bernardo, he informed his attorney that he wanted to plead guilty to Sara's murder as well, but then he would see her parents in that hearing and subsequently refused to provide any further details about the events or where their daughter may be located. 9 days later, when they weren't in the courtroom, he would formally plead guilty to the murder of Sara Anne Wood, but would still refuse to provide the location of her body. He would attempt to recant his confession, but would ultimately be sentenced on April 11th of 1997 to 25 years in prison for second-degree murder. The actual sentencing was delayed by 2 months at the request of Sara's parents because they hoped that they could somehow persuade him to tell them where he had buried their daughter. But he ultimately wouldn't, and the sentencing judge would also implore Lent to just tell this poor family where they buried Sara so that they could have the closure that they so desperately wanted. And when Lent continued to refuse, he told him that he would have had absolutely no hesitation in imposing the death penalty upon him if he had the legal option to do so. And as of right now, Lent is in prison in Massachusetts, serving his sentences for Jimmy Bernardo and the attempted abduction of another young lady who we will talk about next week. In 2013, after Lewis Lent confessed to killing Jamie Lusher and was taken to Greenwater Pond to search for his remains, the New York District Attorney at that time, Jeffrey Carpenter, got permission to take Lent out to search for Sara's remains as well. They would drive to the Massachusetts border, the Vermont border, to the place where he abducted her, and to another place where he said that he murdered her. But after 3 days and over 600 miles driven, there were still no remains to be shown for it. And Attorney Carpenter would say that the consensus was that he absolutely knew where she was, but was not going to tell them. So basically the same feeling that the captain who went searching for Jamie's remains had. He would give him facts that let him know that he did it and that he still knew, and then he would give either false information or pretend not to remember. And then in 2023, one of the detectives that is still on the Lewis Lent case went back out looking in the Green Mountain National Forest, which is in Vermont, after he identified an area there with landmarks that just matched a bunch of the ones in Lent's story. They did another large search with rescue dogs as well, but unfortunately they still have not found anything. And as for her being near Raquette Lake, there is a check that Lent cashed in Pittsfield at 6:18 p.m., which is just a little under 4 hours after 2:30, which is when it is believed that he abducted Sara. Now, it takes 2 hours to get from Frankfort, New York to Pittsfield. It takes an hour and a half to get to Raquette Lake from Frankfort, and around 3 hours to get from Raquette Lake to Pittsfield. So using this time frame, driving in that direction, and let's say the whole assault and murder and burial took a half hour, and I would say that would be a bare minimum, but I don't have much experience or way to gauge that. I'm just trying to throw out a number and guesstimate here. If we say the quickest possible, quicker side here, give it a half hour, that leaves him with 3.5 hours maximum of travel time beyond that, and it probably took longer. So I'm going to say he had less than 3.5 hours of travel time. And using that logic, I plugged Green Mountain Forest into my GPS, and just look. If he went from Frankfurt to Green Mountain Forest, it shows 2 hours and 22 minutes, and then 1 hour and 11 minutes to Pittsfield, 3 hours and 33 minutes total. I'm weird about numbers like that. But the time would just add up. Barely, but it would. So I think it's 2 hours to get from Frankfurt to Pittsfield, and at least a half hour beyond that only leaves an hour and a half, which means he could only deviate so much from that one path from Frankfurt to Pittsfield, yet the search still continues. Authorities do say that they will never give up looking for Sara and Jamie. I truly do hope that both of them are found, along with any other victims that Lewis Lent had, which from that comment, it sounds like there could be more. All right, but Scoot's here. Let's see. Hello, you sleepy. There he is. Today's real fact is go get some sunshine. I don't know. We had a tough day over here, and this is a rough case. So go get some sunshine. Go get some exercise. Stay just strong. That stuff's really good for your soul, and try and be positive. And with that being said, today's positive highlight is going to be the ride for missing children. And let me give you some background. On May 14th of 1995, Sara's ride for missing children started. Bob Wood, her dad, wanted to ride to Washington, D.C. to honor Sara's memory and to raise awareness. And so he, along with 6 other men, would start at the Sara Anne Wood Rescue Center in Washington Hill, which their family also founded, and they would ride their bikes up to the church where Bob had pastored and ride to the place where she was abducted, where they would pause for a moment of silence before heading east to Albany. Then they got some police escorts through New York City, and before they knew it, they made it to the Capitol on May 25th of 1995, just in time for National Missing Children's Day. And 2 years later, 43 riders would ride from Albany to Utica, and the yearly event would be born. The one-day bike ride supports the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and riders are always encouraged to wear Sara's favorite colors, pink and teal. Many wear shirts that state, "Making our children safe, one child at a time." To learn more about this event or to donate to the cause, click on the link in the video description below. All right, guys. Next week, we will finally get into how this monster got captured. I do hope you all have a great week, and please stay safe out there. Bye.